In a rapidly evolving geopolitical climate, Europe's patience with Iran is reaching a breaking point. On July 17, 2025, the foreign ministers of France, Britain, and Germany, the so-called E3, issued a stark ultimatum to Tehran: return to nuclear negotiations by the end of summer or risk facing the full weight of reimposed United Nations sanctions. This warning was delivered in a high-stakes virtual meeting that included the European Union's foreign policy chief and Iran's acting foreign minister Abbas Araqchi. It was their first formal communication since a dramatic escalation in June, when the United States and Israel launched airstrikes targeting Iranian nuclear facilities, a move that sent shockwaves through global security circles and derailed the already fragile diplomatic process. The background: from JPOA to breakdown. To understand the urgency of this diplomatic intervention, it's essential to revisit the trajectory of Iran's nuclear diplomacy. In 2015, Iran signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action JPOA with the P5+1, the US, UK, France, Germany, Russia, China, and the EU. The deal promised sanctions relief in exchange for verifiable limits on Iran's nuclear activities. For a while, the JPOA held, but in 2018, the Trump administration unilaterally withdrew from the deal, reimposing harsh economic sanctions. Iran, in turn, began breaching its obligations, enriching uranium beyond allowed levels, and restricting access to international inspectors. Since then, efforts to revive the JPOA have stalled, complicated by leadership changes, regional tensions, and a global pandemic. The 2022 Vienna talks made modest progress, but by 2024, hopes of restoring the deal had all but evaporated. The June 2025 airstrikes by Israel and the US, reportedly targeting underground enrichment sites and advanced centrifuge facilities, further heightened tensions. Iran accused the West of sabotage. The West, in turn, accused Tehran of accelerating its weapons-grade uranium program in secret. Trust has eroded. Now, the E3 is demanding accountability, and fast. The July 17th call, a turning point in the virtual conference held Thursday, the E3 foreign ministers Catherine Colonna of France, David Lammy of the UK, and Annalena Baerbock of Germany delivered a coordinated message to Iran's Abbas Araqchi. Their tone was measured but firm. Their message: diplomacy is the only path forward, and the window is closing. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell, who facilitated the call, underscored the gravity of the situation. We are committed to peace, but we will not accept unchecked nuclear escalation. Iran must return to serious talks before the end of the summer. According to officials familiar with the conversation, the E3 outlined three specific demands: immediate resumption of nuclear negotiations under EU auspices, full cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA), including access to undeclared sites, a freeze on further uranium enrichment above 3.67%, as originally agreed in the JPOA. In return, the E3 signaled openness to a phased lifting of certain EU sanctions, contingent on verifiable steps from Iran. Araqchi, while not outright dismissive, remained cautious. He reiterated Tehran's principled stance on sovereignty and scientific development, and accused the West of bad faith and double standards. However, he also expressed a willingness to consider a new format for talks if mutual respect and economic guarantees were provided. The geopolitical stakes. Why Europe is acting. Note: E3's renewed pressure on Iran is not occurring in a vacuum. Several strategic factors are at play. 1. The shadow of June's airstrikes. Joint air campaign by Israel and the United States was a clear message. Western powers will not tolerate the risk of Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. While both nations insisted the strikes were defensive, they signaled a willingness to act unilaterally. Europe fears that continued inaction could lead to broader conflict, possibly even a regional war. 2. Russia's distraction. China's caution. With Russia deeply entangled in its war in Ukraine and China focused on Taiwan and internal economic woes, neither power is likely to shield Iran diplomatically at the UN Security Council. This opens a rare window for Europe to rally broader international consensus. 3. Iran's internal instability. Tehran is grappling with domestic unrest. Inflation is soaring, water shortages are worsening, and protests, especially among women and youth, have shaken the regime. The supreme leader remains silent in public, while moderates and hardliners clash behind closed doors. Europe hopes economic incentives could empower more pragmatic voices within Tehran. 4. 2025 U.S. elections loom. With the U.S. presidential election approaching, European powers are racing to create a diplomatic framework that can withstand political changes in Washington. Whether a Democrat or Republican wins, a new administration could shift priorities, again potentially freezing diplomatic momentum. The legal mechanism, snapping back sanctions if Iran fails to respond constructively. The E3 has threatened to trigger the JPO's Dispute Resolution Mechanism (DRM). This mechanism, ironically included in the deal to preserve it, allows any participant to escalate a compliance dispute. If unresolved, it leads to UN Security Council vote to reimpose sanctions that were lifted under the 2015 agreement. The catch? Under the original JPOA terms, the UK, France, and Germany, still signatories, can effectively force the reimposition of sanctions even if other council members oppose it. A so-called snapback could reinstate arms embargoes on iron block oil exports and shipping insurance, freeze overseas assets of Iranian entities, isolate Iran's central banking system. Such sanctions would be devastating for Iran's already struggling economy and send a powerful diplomatic message. Iran's calculus: between resistance and ruin. Despite mounting pressure, Iran is unlikely to cave easily. Since the U.S. withdrawal in 2018, Iran's political elite has grown more nationalistic and distrustful of Western diplomacy. Tehran views its nuclear program not only as a bargaining chip, but also as a symbol of scientific pride and deterrence. Moreover, the regime believes the West has failed to uphold its end of past deals, especially in shielding Iran from secondary sanctions imposed by Washington. Iran's strategy, analysts say, is to wait out Western threats, gambling that the E3 won't follow through or that global divisions will prevent unified action. However, with Europe now clearly aligning with US red lines, this approach may be riskier than Tehran anticipates. Reactions from around the world. United States. Washington welcomed the E3's ultimatum. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in a statement, "We support our European partners' efforts to restore accountability and non-proliferation standards. Iran must choose dialogue over defiance." Israeli Prime Minister Yoav Gallant expressed support, but warned against further delays. "The time for talking is over. Iran's nuclear program must be stopped, by diplomacy or by force," he said during a cabinet meeting. Russia and China. In contrast, Russia and China urged caution. Moscow's foreign ministry called for restraint and de-escalation, while Beijing offered to mediate future talks. Both countries oppose unilateral sanctions and favor multilateral diplomacy, but neither has shown willingness to shield Iran from a renewed sanctions regime. Middle East regional powers such as Saudi Arabia and the way cautiously backed Europe's stance. "We seek a region free of nuclear weapons," said a joint statement from the Gulf Cooperation Council. "Transparency and compliance are non-negotiable." The road ahead. Scenario 1. Iran returns to talks. If Iran re-engages diplomatically by early September, a phased roadmap could be established. Freeze on enrichment over 5 full IAEA inspections, resume partial sanctions, relief confidence building economic steps. This could stabilize the region and open space for broader discussions, including on ballistic missiles and regional militias. Scenario 2. Snapback sanctions triggered. If no progress is made, the E3 will likely activate the DRM, leading to a rapid escalation. Iran may retaliate by expelling IAEA inspectors, boosting enrichment to weapons grade, closing the Strait of Hormuz, supporting proxy attacks across the Middle East. This scenario risks war either through direct confrontation or a spiraling cycle of retaliation. Scenario 3. hybrid pressure engagement in a more nuanced approach. The E3 could combine snapback threats with behind-the-scenes diplomacy, using third-party mediators like Qatar or Oman to restart negotiations. This path requires delicate timing and political will on both sides. The July 17 ultimatum marks one of the most serious diplomatic warnings to Iran since the collapse of the JPOA. With summer halfway gone, and the world facing multiple crises from Ukraine to Gaza to climate upheaval, the window for preventing a nuclear crisis is narrowing. For Iran, the decision is existential: engage with the global community or risk deeper isolation, economic collapse, and potential conflict. For Europe, the next few weeks will determine whether it can still play the role of peacebuilder or if it must once again become the enforcer. In the end, diplomacy remains possible, but only if Tehran is willing to act.